We have today with us Professor Jody Raphael from DePaul University. Professor Raphael is going to tell us a little bit about trafficking, and she's going to start with the trends for trafficking within Chicago.
Let me first start with nationwide, and then let me go back, and then we'll zoom back into Chicago. We are in a time when we have really increased our awareness of trafficking for sexual exploitation, and especially trafficking for children who are being exploited. We will never know the number of children who are sexually exploited in the United States or in Chicago, because as you can imagine, this is a very hidden, clandestine activity, and we can't really go out and survey and talk to people and try to get a representative sample of people in prostitution and figure out how many of them are trafficked or anything like that. And this is something which is not discussed on the internet. It's kept very, very, very secret. The good news is, though, that nationwide we have some research that is, some new research methods that are being used, which I won't go into any great detail, which are approximating representative samples. So some of the data that is starting to come out is giving us a much better idea of the numbers of children who are exploited. We don't have a nationwide number, and you can't extrapolate from a particular location to a nationwide number. But for example, in New York City, we have almost 4,000 youth who are in the sex trade industry and are being trafficked, at this very moment. And I think that's very, very good research. That gives us, that's not as large as some of these huge estimates that are bandied about that are not based on any research, but we're really starting to get a pretty good idea. The National Hotline in 2015 received 5,500 confirmed cases of trafficking, of trafficking for sexual exploitation. Those are not confirmed by the police department, but those are pretty much confirmed by the nature of the call and by the people that are talking to the callers. And they had almost 1,600, over 1,600 victims themselves call the hotline. So we know, we're starting to understand that this is a very, a substantial problem when you add up the numbers then in all the different cities that we're going to be able to see. We have two huge problems, though, that remain to be solved nationwide. And the first is the use of the internet for advertising children for sexual exploitation. As you may know, Backpage is the primary source for these ads now. And the owners of Backpage have resisted all efforts to remove those ads and or to shut down the section. Law enforcement will tell you over and over again, regardless of what part of the country you're in, they put fake ads up advertising children, and the children are very young. I mean, they're deliberately fake to say, there's no doubt that this is a minor, this is a very young minor. And those ads, although Backpage says that they monitor the website, those ads remain up, they are not taken down. And the problem is that federal law now immunizes Backpage and other internet providers. They are not responsible for the content of ads that are put up by their customers, even if it's ads for illegal activity, like sexual exploitation. So you could put an ad up saying you're looking for someone to murder your wife, and you could put it up there on Backpage, and they would not have to take it down, and they are immune from liability. That federal law needs to be changed. In Europe, that is not the case. It's just going to take a law that's passed by Congress, and Congress has basically refused to act. There's a law that's been policy that's been introduced by Senator Feinstein of California and our own senator here from Illinois, but it is really not moved. And we need, I mean, it is really beyond belief that we are allowing these kinds of ads to be put up. And Sheriff Dart here in Chicago has said that when they put up a fake ad like that, and then they make assignations and they station themselves in the hotel rooms, and these parade of men come through, And you know, they might catch 20 men a night doing this, and there'll be a number of pedophiles that have been convicted pedophiles who are actually on the sex registry and so on, will come through into the hotel. And the second thing is that we need laws in many more states that prevent a child from being charged and convicted of a prostitution-related offense. If a child is under 18, you know, that's statutory rape. We have laws against that. So if the child is selling sex, she's under the age of consent, and she's really a victim. Somebody is probably controlling her, but she should not be charged because of her age and because of the fact that she's probably being controlled either by a family member or a boyfriend. Should not be charged with a prostitution-related offense. Illinois has a law prohibiting that. California has just passed a law, but we have only 9 states that have gone that route. So we still have children who are victims, who can be victims of trafficking, who are being charged and convicted of prostitution-related offenses and are spending time in juvenile detention facilities and not getting the services that they need.
And you mentioned in Illinois, Professor, that the law has changed and that the children are not charged with a crime if they are being prostituted. When did those changes come about, and what safety plans are in place when children are rescued from these situations?
That is, I think that was January of 2013, and the case gets referred to the Department of Children and Family Services, and they are considered to be abused and neglected children, and a service plan should be put in place for them. And then, of course, hopefully their trafficker will be revealed, and then our law enforcement can take efforts to to deal with the criminal side of that. Now, when you talk about Chicago, in 2010, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, under Anita Alvarez, established the very first human trafficking unit to prosecute cases. And we had, up until that point, never prosecuted a trafficker in Cook County. The federal government may have prosecuted a few here and there, but we had 0 cases. And since 2010, we have prosecuted 122 cases. Now that's cases, so there might be multiple numbers of traffickers who have been successfully prosecuted. Now, again, that's a very small number. So the good news is we have an excellent unit that's available. The calls to the hotline, since in the same period of time, we had almost 800 calls to the hotline, national hotline. So you can see there's a discrepancy in terms of the number of calls that are coming in. That's because you can't always prosecute these cases. If the victim doesn't want to be involved in the prosecution, if it's not safe to be involved in the prosecution, and we can't really, how can we guarantee the safety of the victim? So the bad news is that we are now prepared, which we have not been, to take action and take very good action against traffickers. That does not look like it's going to be, we're not going to stop trafficking by prosecuting traffickers. We have many more cases out there that are not coming to the attention of law enforcement, and these cases are very difficult to prosecute. So that we have to take other steps, I think, to end this kind of exploitation. The DCFS has a hotline, and they have undertaken, so we have an Illinois hotline, 625 investigations since 2011. 57% of them are here in Cook County, and the average age of the victim is 14.5 years. And they were only able to confirm 20% of those cases in terms of taking action against the trafficker. So what we have our to summarize, we have our things in place. We've got the hotlines, we've got law enforcement trained up, we've got prosecutors understanding what needs to be done. but it's really just the beginning in terms of eliminating this kind of child sexual exploitation.
Professor Raphael, you talked about the trends nationally and within Chicago. Can you speak briefly about internationally? How is trafficking affecting the international community?
International is a very interesting story, which has lessons for us, I think, in the United States and in Chicago. In the 1990s and the early and years right after that, many of the European countries decided to legalize or decriminalize prostitution. And the thinking was that this would be of assistance to people who were in the industry. They would not be subject to being arrested and harassed by law enforcement. And the sense was that if it were legal and it was sort of totally out in the open, if they were being trafficked or coerced or whatever, they would feel freer to go to law enforcement and to complain about it. In other words, they were trying to take prostitution out of the shadows and try to bring and they thought this was going to be a way to end the exploitation of people within the industry. The facts proved otherwise. So many of the countries in the EU, France, Germany, Austria, and so on, really decriminalized pretty much all of prostitution. Amsterdam was one of the first over time to see an increase in trafficking and to see a visible increase in trafficking. Now, in Amsterdam, as you may know, there's a red light district, and the girls and women are behind glass doors and panels and so on. And they began seeing 13 and 14-year-old girls from Nigeria being offered for sale. So it became very visible in Amsterdam and then in all of the other countries. And it should have been obvious. You legalize something, it's the green light. So people that want to buy sex are going to go to these places. It increases demand, and most people will obey the law. So if it becomes legal, then this is something that they're going to do with it. And most girls and women or young boys do not want to volunteer to sexually service 20 men customers a night. Most of us, this is not something that we want to do. So there's not enough volunteers, so coercion and trafficking have increased to absolutely astonishing degrees. So the facts on the ground have really mandated that all of these countries take a new look at their prostitution laws. And many countries now, including France, Canada actually, Sweden, Norway, Finland, have revised their laws and are recriminalizing because they found they cannot contain trafficking or eliminate trafficking within a legalized system. It's just the open door. It's just the green light. Finland and Italy Finland has passed a law, and Italy is looking at a law which will penalize the customer if the customer buys sex from a trafficked individual, which of course sounds good because they don't want to criminalize someone if it's two consenting adults. So if the customer buys from a minor or buys from a trafficked individual, but that has proven impossible to enforce. How does the customer know whether the person has been trafficked or not? How does the person know whether it's a minor? And it has just been kind of a nightmare. So that doesn't look like it's going to work. The Swedish model, or often called the Nordic model, basically does not criminalize the seller, usually the woman or girl in prostitution, but criminalizes all customers, and basically is a statement saying buying sex is against our societal principles mainly because of the exploitation within the industry. But it's saying that the only way to stop this kind of trafficking is to shut the whole industry down. The trafficking is for the customer. The trafficking is to supply for the customer. And we really have to shut down and eliminate the customer. And then people want to make money, they'll go off and do, you know, something else, but they won't be trafficking individuals because there's not going to be any money to be made from it. So it's called an end demand strategy. And this is really sweeping through Europe now. People are really looking at it very, very carefully. Now, here in the United States, we don't need to worry about criminalization or legalization, whatever, because we have maintained a criminalized system. But we have maintained a criminalized system for both seller and buyer. So the issue for us is whether over time we want to take a look at eliminating the penalties against the seller because of the fact that many of them are trafficked and we don't really know who's trafficked and who isn't. And it's very difficult for us to screen that in any way. And to begin to go after the buyer and to make it very dangerous, expensive and dangerous for the buyer. So changing our laws is one approach, and they're doing that. They're ahead of us internationally, so they're doing that internationally. It'd be very interesting to see in the next few years whether this works, what the effects, you know, are of that, pro and con. But Europe is a site because so many of you have more international trafficking. I think, you know, girls and women brought in from Estonia, Latvia, and so on, and all the very poor countries in Eastern Europe. And they're coming into the richer countries of Europe. And the borders there are obviously a lot more porous, and they can come in without having to even get on an airplane. They can come in by car. So this is where a lot of the international trafficking is occurring.
And in terms of international trafficking, can you talk about briefly victims coming into the U.S.,
well, again,
to the U.S.?
In terms of victims coming into the U.S., we know that they do. But we have no good information on the number that are coming in at all. We see police will pick up women from Thailand and Korea and so on who we're pretty sure have been trafficked from those countries or who say that they are. But we have no way to measure. I think that the numbers are certainly a lot smaller. Most people think of trafficking, they think it's always these international women that are coming in. I think my guess is that it's 80% of the people in the sex trade industry in the U.S. are native-born Americans. I don't think that there's large numbers of people from Poland or wherever coming into Chicago, for example. But it really depends on where you live. I know that if you are in San Diego, you are going to have large numbers of girls and women being trafficked from Mexico. That I think has been shown through research. So it's when you're on the border with a poor country that I think you're going to see the effects of that. Although I think labor trafficking might be a bigger problem in San Diego than sex trafficking. So the answer is we don't really know. Our sense is that it's not as large a problem as was originally depicted. Some of that I think is changed since the concerns about terrorism. Our borders are a lot more difficult to get through. Someone once told me, and I don't know if it's true, but that there has to be cooperation. To get through O'Hare now, there has to be somebody there in the immigration who is turning the other way because of all of these standards and papers and things that you have to have and the fingerprinting and all the things that go on, that it's very difficult now to transport internationally to the United States. So the traffickers are going somewhere else with that.
Okay. I know that we want to talk about ways to bring awareness to the community and ways to help stop this large problem that we have with trafficking. within our community. And you touched upon changing the laws as one solution. You talked about Europe having the end demand strategy. Is there anything else that we can do as a community to help solve this problem?
I think that you have to view this, and that's a very good question, I think you have to view this as this trafficking exists because there are people that are exploiting other people to make money, and because we have this demand for these services. So we've talked about both of these things, but there is an infrastructure which supports this, without which a lot of this could not occur. So, and basically you have a lot of people that are really not educated enough or are willfully turning away from what they are seeing. And there are some strategies now that need to be employed, and in some localities there are coalitions that are really working with everybody in the community. And I would love to see the Chicago Bar Association, for example, spearhead something like this. But you have hotels and motels. Well, this is the site of most of this trafficking. And the customers are coming into these hotels and motels. And I think that the desk clerk, the night clerk, is pretty aware when you see a man coming in every 10, 15 minutes that something is going on. And of course, they have information as to who has rented the particular room. So I think that the hotels and motels have to train their employees and have to, there are things that they can do to keep their motels and hotels safe from being involved in trafficking. The cab drivers, there are so many times the child is being delivered to the customer by a parent or a trafficker, a young teen, and I think if you look closely, it's pretty obvious that this is what is going on, and this excuse me, this needs to be reported. These people need to be kicked out of your cab. I would love to see employees trained in all of these different businesses as to what they can do to stop trafficking. And I think lawyers have a lot of these businesses as their clients. So I would love to see the lawyers be trained and then talk to their clients about what they can do to join this particular campaign. We still have the problem, and that is that it is somehow become normalized for someone to buy sex from a teenager, and I'm thinking of a 13, 14, 15-year-old. And I think I was talking to someone this week, why is this? Why is this somehow become acceptable? And then you see a lot of advertising, it's in our culture, this youth fetish, and the customers want younger girls for a variety of reasons. They're considered hot, they're considered exciting. Most of them could not get that young girl on their own. They have to pay for it, especially at their age. So this is part of the allure. But we basically we have not gotten a handle on kind of cutting this off and making it unacceptable. And I was talking to somebody, and she said, well, I think most people think that when the 14, 15-year-old is doing this with consent. In other words, this is not a trafficked individual. That could be, but again, we've forgotten that this is still a 14-year-old, and this person should not be doing, this is not good for the development of this child. And there are harms that are going to adhere to her for the rest of her life, and she's going to become addicted to drugs and alcohol and so on. So we have to stop worrying about consent and whether she's doing it voluntarily and whether she's trafficked. We just have to say, this is not something that we want our 13 and 14-year-olds to be doing, and this is not acceptable for people to be doing this. I think that we are very far from, we don't have a way, there's no simple way to do that in our culture, but it is a huge cultural problem for us all around the world, and certainly it's a problem for us in the United States. And when a candidate for president talks about his own daughter and how she's such a hot number or whatever it was, I think without thinking that there's something wrong with this, and says this, not on, it was on a radio show, then we've gone way, way too far, I think, with our obsession with youth and youth bodies and this kind of thing. So, and I think we have, somehow this has become a joke, so that when businesses are trying to recruit somebody that they want to hire, they take him to the local strip. He comes in for an interview, and then they take him to the local strip club. This is a perk, to try to show him what it's going to be great here in Chicago. Apparently, when coaches will take some athlete that they want to come to their team or their school and take them out to some local strip club. All of this has to stop. Bachelor parties before people get married. Why is this now a custom that some stripper comes in at a male bachelor party, or that it's now routine for the whole bridal party to go to Las Vegas, where all of this is on offer? So our culture has, I don't want to say become coarsened, but it's encouraging, it's normalizing all of this. And when you go to the kind of the prostitution capital of the United States, which is Nevada, for your wedding, pre-wedding festivities, what is this saying, about our culture? So I think that but we have to put our foot down about this. But I see no movement in this direction. Now, the recent presidential campaign, there has been a lot of conversation about this, which is a very, very good first step. And maybe over time, this will lead to something. But that, I think, is the fundamental problem when you're talking about child sexual exploitation, and that is the normalization and the assumption that a 13 and 14-year-old, if she decides that she wants to do this, that this is okay, and you're going to really turn the other way.
Professor Raphael, I read some literature about the victims, the children that are being trafficked, having some sort of sign, a silent signal that they can send to a potential client. I don't know if you've heard anything about that or can speak to that, just getting information out there so that the victim is able to speak up and send a message for help.
Yeah, and I think that I think information needs to be put out to the victims. Again, it is very difficult, though, for a victim to get access to any of this information. I mean, they are kept really under very close scrutiny, and it's really difficult. We have this national hotline, which is where they could get information, and they could call in for help. This hotline number needs to be plastered everywhere. I never see any poster or anything about it.
Well, what is that number?
And that number it's a lot of eights, 1-888-373-7888. 1-888-373-7888. That anyone who's listening to this should get a poster from the national hotline or put that number up. It needs to be absolutely plastered, everywhere, including, hospitals. I just can't think of all the places where it should be. And it's important, too, because if you see something that you're suspicious, you can call it also, because they will give that information immediately to the FBI. And the problem is when we look away and we don't report anything, then of course there's no way to offer the help. There's a wonderful group called Truckers Against Trafficking, TAT. They have a fantastic website. They have this hotline everywhere at truck stops across the United States, and they have trained thousands of truck drivers. Now, truck drivers are also customers at truck stops, obviously. This is a place where a lot of children are taken, a lot of teens are taken to these truck stops. So the truckers, if you get on this Truckers Against Trafficking, you will read all about these wonderful rescues where the girl comes to the truck and offers herself to the trucker, and he now knows, and he sees how young she is, and he's been educated. He or she's been educated, and so he knows that she's probably not doing this voluntarily, and how in the heck did she get to this truck stop anyway, right? So he has her come and sit down in the truck, and then he talks to her. And I can't tell you umpteen different examples where the trucker has then driven off with her in the truck, called the hotline or called the police department, and they were able, and they're also able that way, if they work really quickly, to nab the trafficker who's been left behind at the truck stop. So this is where knowledge of that hotline, as well as the education of these truckers, is just making changes, you know, as we speak. And again, if you read the accounts of these truckers on the hotline, they're saying, well, we thought they were just here voluntarily, you know, and, you know, it's just some slutty kid who's, you know, trying to make a buck or something like that. So the awareness and the education has just made an absolute terrific difference. But that hotline just needs to be, you know, everywhere. It should be in the lobby of the CBA, for example. The poster should be up. It should be in grocery stores. But again, it's difficult because these young girls are not able to get out and about. Obviously, they cannot. They have to keep them under control. And many times, as you know, drugs and alcohol will be used to keep them under control also.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Professor Raphael.